This video will show you how to correctly remove, service, and install conventional wheel bearings. It will show you how to service a non-driving tapered wheel bearing and a solid rear axle bearing, as well as the seals, races, and other parts that must be serviced with the wheel bearing. We will also summarize the numerous repair variations that are recommended by the major auto manufacturers. As a result, you should be better prepared to work on any make or model wheel bearing produced by both American and foreign auto manufacturers. Always remember the importance of using proper procedures when servicing a wheel bearing. Wheel bearing failure could cause a serious accident. To remove a typical tapered wheel bearing, first pop off the small dust cap on the wheel hub. Use channel lock pliers or special cap pliers. Then use side cut pliers to straighten and pry out the old cotter pin. Always throw the old cotter pin away so you won't accidentally reuse it. Always install a new cotter pin. Then remove the nut lock if equipped with one. Use your fingers or a wrench or pliers to unscrew the adjusting nut from the spindle. Grasp the drum or rotor and wiggle it to free the outer bearing and washer. Carefully slide the drum off the spindle. The inner bearing and seal will come off with the drum. This same removal procedure would apply to disc brakes. Wipe off the spindle to remove the old grease. Inspect the surfaces of the spindle where the bearings ride. Also, check the keyway and the threads on the spindle for damage. Repair or replace the spindle as needed. Next, take the drum or disc to a workbench and use a pry bar or a screwdriver to remove the old seal. Be careful not to scratch or mar the bore inside the hub. When using a screwdriver, make sure the screwdriver is large enough that it won't be bent and damaged by light prying. Remove the old bearing. Wipe the parts off and wash them thoroughly so that they can be inspected for signs of wear and damage. Inspect the bearing race very carefully. Any markings on the race would require bearing and race replacement. Make sure you inspect every roller and all surfaces on the race for problems. To replace the bearing and race, you must drive them out of the hub. Notches are usually provided in the hub so that you can use a mild steel bar to drive on the back side of the race. Use light hammer blows to slowly force the race out of the hub. Drive on one side of the race and then the other. Discard the old race. This animation shows how your driver installs in through the hub and can be used to drive out the old race. You will then use the correct diameter driver to force the new race into position into the hub. After removal, inspect the race bore in the hub for signs of damage. Remove the other race if needed. Make sure you have the correct replacement bearing. Also, remember to replace the race and the bearing as a set. Part numbers are provided on the races and the bearings. Next, you are ready to install the new race. Find a driver that is slightly smaller than the bore in the hub. Fit the new race into position on the hub. Then use your driver to force the new race down into place. Make sure to drive the race in squarely, because if it cocks, binding and damage could result. Keep driving until you hear the race seat into the hub. The pitch or sound of the hammer blows will change when the race is fully seated. Install the other bearing race if required. Again, make sure it is fully bottomed in its bore. Next, use high temperature or extreme pressure grease to lubricate the new bearing. Pack the new bearings fully with grease. You can do this by hand or with this handy syringe-type bearing packer. In any case, the cage and all the rollers must be fully surrounded with grease. Note how this bearing packer installs grease around all of the rollers. Use your hands to apply grease to the outside of the rollers. Make sure your hands are perfectly clean when packing wheel bearings. Failure to properly lubricate the bearings can cause bearing failure. Also, install grease into the cavity inside the hub. Fill the hub with grease to about the inside diameter of the outer race. The grease in the hub serves as an extra supply of grease for the wheel bearings. Fit the packed inner wheel bearing down into its race. Then you can install the grease seal. Make sure you have the correct replacement grease seal. Compare the old and new seal. Compare their outside diameters to make sure they are the same, and also compare their inside diameters. A part number is sometimes visible on the old seal. Use a seal driver to force the seal down into its bore. Check that the seal is square on the hub. Then use light hammer blows on your seal driver to force the seal down into position. Wipe off excess grease. to prevent it from contaminating the brake shoes. Apply a small amount of grease to the inside diameter of the seal. This will provide initial lubrication. Again, wipe off excess grease. Now you can install the drum hub assembly back onto the spindle. Carefully slide the drum into place without damaging the seal. Wiggle the drum and rotate it to make sure it is fully in place. Install the outer wheel bearing and the washer. The tab on the washer must fit into the groove on the spindle. Screw on the adjusting nut. You are then ready to adjust the bearings. To use a torque wrench to adjust the bearings, rotate the wheel while torquing the nut to about 20 foot-pounds. Then back off the nut about a half turn. Then, using an inch-pound torque wrench, tighten the adjusting nut to specs, about 10 to 15 inch-pounds. But always refer to factory specification. Another procedure for adjusting the wheel bearings involves using a plain wrench to tighten the adjusting nut. Tighten the nut while turning the drum or rotor until a slight bind is felt. When the rotor binds slightly, all parts are properly seated. Back the nut off a 1/16 to a quarter turn to provide sufficient end play, typically about 1 to 10 thousandths of an inch. To check your bearing adjustment, use a dial indicator to measure end play. Mount the indicator base as close to center of the rotor or hub as possible. Put the indicator tip against the end of the spindle. Set the indicator at 0. Grasp the rotor at 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Push the rotor in and out, oscillating it at the same time to seat the parts. Read the bearing end play on the indicator. Readjust as needed. After adjusting the bearing properly, install the nut lock and the new cotter pin. Bend the new cotter pin over and cut off the other end. With the cotter pin properly installed, install the dust cover. Fit it squarely on the hub and use light taps from a hammer to seat it in the hub.